up, team? Hope y'all are doing good today. Welcome back to Big Boys Boxing for another bit of a live. Today won't be a stream where everyone can join, unfortunately. Today, once again, I'm going to be going in on Mauricio Sulaimáns and the WBC. So, I'll just quickly jump over and check some audio and whatnot. We'll get the show on the roll. So, audio's all good. Okay, so I've compiled some comments out of a Mauricio Sulaimáns interview that was done on Boxing Social. Big shout out to Rob. Does some great work, and I will leave the link to the full interview once I've completed the stream. So without further ado, we'll get into some of these comments. Firstly, Mauricio Sulaimáns, what is a franchise champion and what are their obligations? So here we go.
One is to represent always the WBC inside the ring and outside the ring. He's got social responsibility topics that he will do together with the WBC, and just a combination of situations where the intention of this designation is to bring the boxing industry to continue to grow.
Okay, so he says this is to evolve the boxing industry, right? Fair enough, they have some obligations to the WBC. Inside and outside of the ring. Okay. Obligations to represent the WBC. Alright. We'll move on then. So, check this.
The franchise, it's not a new championship or a title, it's a designation. So, there's no new belt, there's no new situation. It's a non-transferable designation to allow a boxer of a specific characteristics to perform and grow the industry of the sport.
Okay, so it's not a title or a designation, he says. It's not a title or a championship. We'll just have a quick check of that one part once again.
The franchise, it's not a new championship or a title, it's a designation.
It's not a championship or a title, it's a designation. So if it's not a championship, why is the name of it the franchise champion? Should be named the franchise designation, shouldn't it? That's what I would have thought. But okay, let's continue.
The franchise, it's not a new championship or a title, it's a designation.
Oh, not that clip, sorry. Just reinforcing the point there, but let's go.
When you have a interim champion and the world champion of the division does not fight him for whatever reason, medical, retire, or simply vacate the title, the interim champion becomes the world champion. So it's a rule that has always existed, and Charlo was the interim champion in the middleweight division. When Canelo was awarded the distinction of franchise champion, then he became the world champion as well.
So I've got no qualms with that. That's a rule that's been around for a long time. Quite often, somebody who's won a final eliminator and the champion is currently busy and can't fulfill their championship obligations, the mandatory is also named the interim champion. So, like Mauricio said, if the champion can't fulfill his obligations for whatever reason, the mandatory who has earned his title shot gets the title. That's cool. I've got no qualms with that whatsoever. That's a rule that's been around for a long time. So we'll continue a little bit further.
us. We don't intend to confuse anybody. We just want the champions to continue fighting the best fights possible.
Well, you certainly have confused everybody, including yourself, as we're going to find out as we get further through this interview. And we all want to see champions fight the best fights. For me, that means fulfilling your championship obligations, which is fighting the guys who have earned the right to challenge for the title, the championship title. Okay? So, moving on.
Do you think that the undisputed champion is a top priority in the world of the sport?
In the world of boxing, sure is. It's the highest honor anybody can have in boxing. That's what boxers strive to become. Undisputed champion. Quoting Deontay Wilder, one champion, one face, one name. That is undisputed champion. Nothing more, nothing less. There are 4 recognized sanctioning bodies. An undisputed champion holds all 4 of those belts. Therefore, it cannot be disputed that whoever holds those belts in that division is the champion. That is the definition of undisputed, and that is the definition of what boxers strive for in professional boxing today. And that's also what fans want to see. So let's continue.
So it's a matter of great importance, and I'm sure that if Canelo or Lomachenko fight a fighter who has the other 3 belts, it's going to be an undisputed.
How is that when Jamal Charlo and Devin Haney hold one piece to the puzzle? If you don't have the 4 belts, you can dispute that that person is not the undisputed champion. That's what undisputed means. You cannot dispute it. So I'm sure that if Loma fights somebody with 3 belts, or Canelo fights somebody with 3 belts, it's definitely disputed that they are champions. It's the whole definition. That's why it's called undisputed. I know that this guy's first language isn't English, but Mauricio, it's not hard to Google or look in a dictionary for the definition of a word. Go look it up, man. So let's continue a little bit more. Uh-oh, I've got a gap here. Just a sec, peeps. Had to make a stuff up when I chopped these pieces up, didn't I? Of course I did. Okay, here's the next part.
So if the concern is that, oh my God, there's never going to be an undisputed champion, I put that in a second tier, with a much more importance of giving today the best fights that are possible with the best fighters.
I totally disagree. Totally disagree. You're trying to put the most coveted prize in boxing as second tier to your opinion of what is the best fights. For whatever reason. It could be for money, it could be because you don't like certain fighters, or whatever. But putting undisputed as a second tier when it's been the most coveted prize ever since boxing has been professional, you fucking idiot. Next, let's see what he's got to say now.
Lomachenko represents the WBC and is the WBC champion.
But Devin Haney has the belt.
Both have the belt.
Oh, both have the belt now. Hang on a minute. What did you say at the start here? The franchise champion. Let's have a listen.
The franchise, it's not a new championship or a title, it's a designation.
So, how can the franchise champion have the belt as well if it's not a championship or a title? You've contradicted yourself in the same interview. One more time.
The franchise, it's not a new championship or a title, it's a designation.
And just to be sure, listen to this part again.
Lomachenko represents the WBC and is the WBC champion.
But Devin Haney has the belt.
Both have the belt.
Lomachenko represents the WBC and he's a WBC champion. You said it's not a new championship. So how can Lomachenko be a champion if he doesn't hold a championship title?
The franchise, it's not a new championship or a title, it's a designation.
It's not a title. It's not a championship. You're no longer a WBC champion. You have a designation, not a championship. And what was that before? We're not trying to confuse anybody? What a freaking joke, man. What a freaking joke. So we'll continue a little bit more. Let's see what else this Mauricio Sulaimáns has to say.
Some fights need to grow into the moment where they have to take place. The big fights grow into a time, and that's the case.
The big fights grow. The old marination excuse. It's fine if somebody wants to put off a fight and make it grow. But if they hold a championship belt and they're not ready to fight whoever they're supposed to be fighting or need to fight, then they should be stripped. Simple as that. The guys coming up earn their shots at a title, at a legitimate title, with a legitimate champion who won the belt by earning it. If you do all the hard work to get up to a mandatory position, then you get gifted a belt. You can't moan and bitch that everybody's calling you a paper champion because you got gifted it. So I can't find any validity in that last comment from Mauricio Sulaimáns. It's just a built-in excuse for what's to come. So let's continue.
Today we have 4 world championships. You have challengers moving to challenge for other organizations. You have fighters that unify and then they have to be stripped or they have to leave one of the belts because of that same rule. We're looking at the mandatory contender rule to try to find the best formula. The mandatory contender rule is the obligation of a champion so he does not duck, to call it in a way, the best challenger. And sometimes the mandatory contender is not the best challenger or the best fight out there.
I agree that definitely sometimes the mandatory challenger isn't the best. But if you want to put that person as your mandatory for your champion, the champion has an obligation to fight that guy. He has done the work to get there. And if you don't give him that opportunity, then the champion should be stripped. Straight up. And it does get complicated having 4 belts, but the governing bodies seem to be allowing mandatory schedules, and if you make the proper applications, if you have more than one mandatory pressing, you can work it out between the governing bodies get an exemption for one, fight the other. It's been done time and time again. We saw Tyson Fury get stripped by the IBF after he beat Vladimir Klitschko, but that's because him and his team did not put in a request for an exemption. It was their own fault. It can be done, and this excuse that he's making for champions to duck, in his words, their mandatory obligations as champions is bullshit. A champion has obligations. If you don't have those obligations and you can't lose your belt in the ring, you are not a champion. You are a designation, as you stated at the start of this video, Mauricio. So let's continue some more.
I'm gonna be blunt. I am confused at times, and I don't like to stand or sit around without a response to something.
Well, do you not think, Mauricio, that possibly you should have got some rules and regulations sorted before you made up this designation? I think so. Therefore, you wouldn't be confused, fans wouldn't be confused, and fans wouldn't be trying to boycott you come 2020. So let's continue.
To become mandatory challenger, you must win a final elimination bout. So we have consistently done that.
Bullshit! Bullshit! Let me put it this way. How many mandatories for Deontay Wilder have fought legitimate final eliminators? I'll give you a second. Think about it before I tell you the answer. 0. Deontay Wilder's first mandatory was Bermane Stiverne, who prior to getting his mandatory spot, he fought Derek Rossi in a fight where many thought he at least drew or lost. But it wasn't a final eliminator. It couldn't have been, because Derek Rossi was nowhere near the top 15. I think it was Derek Rossi. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was. He was nowhere to be seen in the WBC's top 15, let alone in the WBC rules. It says a voluntary defense. Oh, sorry, that's a different subject. A final eliminator has to be between the two top contenders, top available contenders. So Bermane Stiverne didn't fight a final eliminator. He was gifted the next mandatory. Dominic Breazeale. He was in a final eliminator, but it was only a final eliminator for him. He fought against Eric Molina a month after he was suspended by UKAD from fighting in the UK. And while I'm on this, like I've stated in my last video, Eric Molina was suspended at the time he participated in a final eliminator. He was suspended from fighting in the UK, but he was still allowed to participate and fight in the States. That's fine, I got no qualms with that. But they're suspending Dillian Whyte's status as interim and mandatory because of an adverse finding that UKAD found. When the WBC has their own testing protocols and company, in which Dillian Whyte passed everything. The only jurisdiction UKAD has is in the UK, and it's drug testing. and the British Board of Boxing Control have control over the licenses. As it stands, the British Board of Boxing Control let Dillian fight Oscar Rivas and his license is clear. But the WBC are handing out this suspension of his status based on hearsay. They don't have any information from UCAD. The only information that's legit is very private. They're going off what Mike Coppinger said. But anyway, I'm getting a bit off track here. And the next mandatory that's just been announced is Tyson Fury, who also has not fought a final eliminator. They've given it to them. So the only consistency I can see with mandatories for the WBC is they're consistently giving the mandatory status to people. Just listen to that bit one more time to make sure I didn't get any wires crossed here.
To become mandatory challenger, you must win a final elimination bout. So we have consistently done that.
So that's a straight out lie. Straight out lie, Mauricio. You're full of shit. Moving on.
And we are transparent. We are open to every question and we never say no to an interview or to clarify anything. So we're doing our best. We are working hard and we represent the world, and just ask Charlo and ask Lomachenko what do they think about the franchise. And that's the response.
Charlo's happy about it because he got a title without having to fight for it. Lomachenko's happy because he didn't have to fight Devin Haney because you stripped him and gave him this designation. He's no longer a champion. You said it yourself, Mauricio, didn't you?
The franchise, it's not a new championship or a title, it's a designation.
Oh, Mauricio. You fucked it right up, man. So we'll move on.
The franchise, it's not an...
Oops, wrong clip, sorry, y'all. Here we go.
Response. Or giving the opportunity to Lomachenko to fight Haney. Here, there are so many different elements that we cannot control. A manager, a promoter, a site, whatever happens, we cannot rule. You just gave me a scenario with 3 if. And there's so many times that one of those ifs goes south. So what we are taking away that if, we're giving the opportunity to Lomachenko to fight the winner of Teofimo and Komi.
Are you really, Mauricio? Are you really? For me, it seems like you want to gain control over what fights, and you're taking away a championship belt so these guys can make the fights that they want, not the fights that they're obligated to take as champions. Not the fights that the mandatory challengers deserve because they've worked their way up there. You've taken that away from them. All in the name of you trying to control what fights a designation fights. It's not a champion, remember? It's not a title, remember? You said it, Mauricio. Let's move on.
Let's go back. Dillian Whyte is in a process from a adverse finding by UCAD. It is highly confidential and highly legal. There's many legalities involving that. We had met with Dillian Whyte, his representatives. We are doing our ongoing investigation. So the fight with Fury against Wilder in February will be the mandatory of that year, of that period, and we have set the next mandatory for February 2021. If Dillian Whyte is cleared of everything and of the process, He's confirmed as interim champion and mandatory challenger. He's got secured February 2021 the championship fight against the champion, whoever he is.
So, how can the WBC mandate a fight that's already signed and sealed? And how can Tyson Fury be the mandatory, having not fought a final eliminator that you say you so consistently use to determine a mandatory? I mean, you say you're not trying to confuse everybody, but at every turn you throw the rulebook out the fucking window. It's easy to not be confused if you follow your fucking rules. Not to mention the fact that Deontay Wilder has faced 2 illegitimate mandatories since he became champion in 2015. Everybody's been moaning that he faces a mandatory on average of once every 2.5 years. So you've turned around and started trying to make a mandatory every year all of a sudden because people have been moaning about it. Yet you still go and install another illegitimate mandatory. Somebody who hasn't worked to get there. Somebody who's fought 1 WBC fight in how many years? Or 1 top 15 WBC fight in the last few years anyway. I can't remember off the top of my head if Pianeta and Safari were actually WBC sanctioned fights. I imagine they were, to get Tyson into the rankings so he could fight Deontay Wilder. But since fighting Wilder, he's fought Tom Schwartz and Otto Wallen, neither of which have been in the WBC's rankings. So where the fuck is this final eliminator? You're full of shit. And what happens if Dillian Whyte gets cleared of any wrongdoing before the end of the year? I mean, that's right up in the air. UKAD take forever to make their decisions. But Dillian Whyte is appealing the A sample. And he had a hearing prior to the Rivas fight. The British Board of Boxing Control gave him the okay to fight. For whatever reason. We don't know the details, but I'm pretty sure the British Board of Boxing Control would not have let Dillian Whyte continue and suspended his license if there was grounds for him to be suspended. As it stands, he's been cleared at present. He's got an appeal process going through. But for me, the British Board of Boxing Control letting Whyte fight suggests that whatever was in his system, the adverse finding was such a small amount that it wouldn't have been any advantage, and possibly unintentional. So I think it's likely he's probably going to be cleared, because the British Board of Boxing Control don't fuck around when it comes to drugs. UKAD stretch out processes forever and ever, but the British Board of Boxing Control do not mess around when it comes to drug suspensions. Dillian Whyte got 2 years previously for consuming some Germanian root, which is in a supplement. If that was in the States, he might have got 6 months. This time around, if he is found guilty, he's possibly going to get 4 to 8 years ban. But the British Board of Boxing Control gave him the okay to fight. So, man, if Dillian Whyte's cleared by the end of the year, he should be mandatory. He should be interim championship. I had no problem with them suspending his status until he was cleared. But now they've gone and stretched that date out for another 14 months before he can possibly be mandatory and interim. To slot an illegitimate mandatory in there to validate Deontay Wilder's lack of mandatory fights. It doesn't validate it. I mean, Tyson Fury is a good fighter and probably worthy of being a mandatory if he had fought a final eliminator. But that's not the point. He hasn't fought a final eliminator, and none of Deontay Wilder's mandatories ever have. Not a legitimate final eliminator, like I said. Dominic Breazeale fought a final eliminator against Eric Molina, who was way down the rankings in the WBC. And the WBC said it's a final eliminator for Dominic Breazeale, but if Eric Molina wins, then no, it wouldn't have been a final eliminator. Well, that's not a fucking final eliminator then, is it? Moving on.
He's not suspended. He might be able even to fight in the UK. He's not suspended at all. He's going through a process of the investigation of something that happened. It occurred. So they're doing their investigation. The WBC is doing its own investigation, and we're coming out with the results.
Oh yeah? What are you investigating? You don't have any information. The only information the WBC has is the same information we have. UCAD had an adverse finding. That's it. Talking shit. Moving on.
Dillian is not available at this moment.
But he can box outside the UK.
Yeah, he's not suspended, but there's an inquiry. This is something that is being investigated. So his status, if he was to fight Wilder, he can fight him as a voluntary. If he's not suspended whatsoever. But his right that he earned as mandatory and interim champion right now is suspended until everything is cleared.
Well, effectively, you've extended the suspension on his status until February 2021, whether he gets cleared before then or not. You fucking ripped him off. Or possibly ripped him off. And yes, he is being investigated by people who have the actual information. He's going through a process with UCAD. Not you, so why don't you fuck off?
The WBC champion is the best. The WBC champion is the champion of the world. And Wilder is very active. Wilder has Ortiz lined up, Fury lined up, so he has not petitioned for any designation. That would be more for ego, the way you are portraying it. But the WBC is very proud of each of our champions, and they are the best in the division, and they are the WBC champions, so there's no issue of that.
Yeah, I hope Wilder doesn't become a franchise champion as well. Well, I shouldn't say that. I hope he doesn't become a franchise designation, because it's not likely for Wilder to change weight divisions in the first place. He has one belt, so it's not like any of his mandatories are gonna make him be stripped. But it certainly seems like the WBC really don't want Dillian Whyte to fight for their title for whatever reason. Is he scared? I don't know. I doubt it. Is it because it's Eddie Hearn and Matchroom? Possibly. Is it because he's not a US fighter? Possibly. But the franchise champions, it's not only the WBC to blame. When it comes down to it though, they do have the final say. They've made up this designation bullshit and it's fucked everybody over. And no Mauricio Sulaimáns. Like you said earlier, they both have the belt. the WBC champion and the franchise champion both have the belt. But no, they don't, because
a new championship or a title, it's a designation. The franchise, it's not a new championship or a title, it's a designation. The franchise, it's not a new championship or a title, it's a designation.
Your words, man. You're fucking boxing. Right in the ass, with no Vaseline. Hey. Now, that was the end of the... I think that was the end of the audio clips that I wanted to get through. So, just gonna have a quick look over in the chat over here. See who's about. Oh, welcome to everybody. I'm gonna have to go through these comments later on and have a look around, but I suggest everybody get on board come January 1st. The shenanigans and the bullshit and the throwing away of the rulebook, the creating designations to try and gain control of boxers, it's all too much. The mandatories being given shots without fighting final eliminators, it's all too much for me. This WBC was once the most respected governing body in the world when Jose Sulaimáns was in charge. Now his boy Mauricio Sulaimáns is trying to make all these changes, trying to break his own father's rules, the rules of Queensbury boxing, giving these these champions excuses to duck mandatories. It all adds up to boycott WBC 2020. Look, I'm going to type it in the chat for you right now. This is the tag you need to spread around. Man, can't type. There you go. Spread that tag around. Copy paste it. Spread it everywhere, man. This organization is killing boxing. He said it himself. I put Undisputed as a second tier. Fuck you, Mauricio. Get the fuck out of here. You can't change shit that everybody understands. You can't make rules up as you go to try and keep hold of sanctioning fees, because you know this was created not long after Canelo Alvarez chucked the WBC belt in the rubbish bin. I'm totally sick of it. I'm over it. I hope you are too. Let's move on to bigger and better things. That's my rant for today. Thank you very much for joining me, y'all. Don't forget to hit that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon for notifications for future content. This is Big Boys Boxing. I'm Jono, and I'm out. See you!